Hello everyone and welcome to every episode of Family Guy Season 21 reviewed. Only a few more seasons to go now, until I've seen all of this show. If you're still getting something out of this series, firstly that's great, but also as ever I would appreciate the support, whether that be in the form of a like or subscribe. I have no extra detail regarding this season in particular, so I will just get into the first of these 20 episodes, which is Season 21, Episode 1, Oscars Guy. We get Family Guy style retellings of 3 Oscar-winning stories: Silence of the Lambs, American Beauty, and Forrest Gump. There were no cutaways here to speak of, but my favourite moment was Forrest Gump's many attempts at running. The season opener gets a 3 out of 5. The first part was a fairly faithful retelling of Silence of the Lambs. Not a great deal to add. I think Stewie captured the vibe of Hannibal Lecter quite well, and there was some drama with the way they did it. The American Beauty segment was much more content with poking fun at the movie, about how they really wanted us to know that traditional families are the problem, and that the sexual attractions were all incredibly bizarre if you look at it. Because it wasn't played as straight, it did mean there was less drama and intensity to the story, but you could argue it was funnier. The final part felt the least fresh. Forrest Gump spoofs are incredibly overdone. I feel even this show has touched on it before. They didn't bring much new here. However, it did have my favourite running gag, which was Forrest running. First, how he could inexplicably run fast, then when he runs all the way home, with a callback to the Two Princes song from earlier. Like always when this show tries these movie trilogies, it's competently done, adding just enough comedy and commentary on the source material to make it work. It is, however, predictable by nature, and doesn't exactly take the most effort from a writing perspective. Episode 2, Bend or Blockbuster. Peter takes his family on a road trip to rent a VHS tape from the last Blockbuster in existence. However, they have to go on the run, because he owes Blockbuster a massive late fee. There was only one cutaway here, so by default my favourite was a Bruce Springsteen Jeep commercial. My best moment was the family jumping from the cliff, cutting to film of the Rambo jump. This one gets a lively 4 out of 5. The family having to endure this painfully dull family fun night, pushed by Lois, worked because you felt the boredom without getting bored yourself. Especially with regards to the card game, Peter gets a bright idea after reminiscing on his childhood memories about renting movies from Blockbuster. So he ends up dragging everyone cross-country to visit the last Blockbuster in Oregon. Their journey was quite the mess. They certainly made a mess of the car, culminating in Stewie letting the physical manifestations of their farts out once they reach their destination. At first, the Blockbuster looks like a fun place, a bit of nostalgia, but turns out Peter never returned a movie from decades ago, and now owes them over $32,000. Unable to pay for it, Peter makes a run from the outrageously aggressive Blockbuster employees. Like they literally tried to hunt them. It didn't make much sense, but it was all done for the spectacle. It paid off with 2 funny scenes. The family jumping from the cliff, only to be saved by a stunt double in the form of Rambo and some trees, and the ending where they are saved by drones. Technology symbolically taking out Blockbuster once again. This was fairly action-packed, and everyone seemed to enjoy Peter spicing up their lives after it was all said and done, so it's a win for me. Episode 3, A Wife-Changing Experience. Joe accidentally sees Lois naked, leading to a reinvigoration of his sex life with Bonnie. My best cutaway here was Lois feeling more violated than Miss Pac-Man, and that was also my favourite moment. Sure, it was a very simple reference. You could argue a lazy reference, but I'm a sucker for some Pac-Man material. I gave this one a 3 out of 5. Joe getting turned on by seeing Lois naked was something he was embarrassed about, But of course Lois herself saw it as a compliment. As she puts it, helping a disabled person get an erection. We all know how hungry she is for males to see her as attractive. So despite the fact that this is all out of some selfish validation she needs to get, she did at least try to use it to help Joe in his marriage with Bonnie by putting on shows in her yard for him. It allows him to actually get up for sex with Bonnie for apparently the first time in years. Still, Lois doing this without Peter's knowledge is shady behaviour, and Quagmire notices what's going on and informs Peter. There were a few good Quagmire moments here, by the way, like him apparently having this jogging hobby with Donna. That's an interesting mix. And the scene where he first tells Peter, and Peter acts like Quagmire is his parent, was also good. Peter beating up Joe was indeed a sad scene, but at least it led to Joe realising that he can't keep having Lois do this for him. The subplot of Stewie getting this toy car because of Carter's mistake was okay, nothing much to say about it. Of course, Brian ended up making a mess of the car. The jokes at the expense of Ellen are always good value, but as I said, my favourite here was Miss Pac-Man being chased by that perverted fiend Pac-Man. As well as me just liking Pac-Man references, I think the old game music in the background is what really made it work. Episode 4, The Munchurian Candidate. Lois hypnotizes Peter into satisfying her sexual fantasies, but it backfires when he ends up satisfying Babs. Meanwhile, Brian and Chris laugh at Stewie's new treehouse. Once again, there were no cutaways here. My best moment was Lois screaming as she tries to stop Peter. This one gets a 4 out of 5. Probably a high 4 as well. Unlike a lot of recent episodes, this one had some pizzazz. The hypnosis used on Peter to turn him into a sex demon was a bit too effective. Every time he heard the extra jingle, he loses control of himself. At first, there was the type of scenes you would expect, with Lois taking advantage of it as much as she could. But I must say, the bit where Peter hears the phrase on TV, in the room with Babs, was wild. The ice cream licking image being used was one thing, but Lois's desperate scream was another. Credit to Alex Borstein on that. You really felt that Lois's whole world was crashing around her. It wasn't left there though. They built on this tension with the awkward drive home. The look on their faces as the headlights shine on them was perfect, as was the ignoring of the phone calls, really captured the awkwardness. This was all quite memorable, and made the main plot worthwhile by itself. The subplot had Chris and Brian being total jerks to Stewie, making fun of whatever he tried with his treehouse behind his back, even when objectively it was very impressive. It was a bit much honestly. But the ending where Stewie got back at them made it worthwhile, even if they all end up being shot, possibly to death. I'm sure they'll be fine in the next episode. Another little thing I want to mention here is Donna saying, "Who's this bitch?" after the librarian woman made one of her cheesy jokes. It was so matter of fact, you just sensed her deep disapproval of this woman being in their friend circle, and to be honest, I don't blame her. Episode 5, Unzipped Code. Cleveland is fired as a mailman after a wardrobe malfunction, but flourishes when he gets a new job at the brewery. My best cutaway here was Cleveland worries that his old customers will miss him when he's replaced on his mail route. They didn't. My best moment was Chris, Meg and Stewie complaining that Peter never stole any ketchup from Cleveland's party. This one gets a 3 out of 5. So the setup of the guys making their own sexy workplace calendar had some good moments, like Peter's perverted hand puppet and Cleveland's bad internet during the group call. Unfortunately for him, his loose ball cost him his job at the postal service. He wasn't unemployed for long though, as Peter's boss notices his mind for organisation and hires him. Unsurprisingly, he soon starts outshining Peter, simply by being a much better employee. much to Peter's annoyance. His awkwardness at Cleveland's celebration party was well done, and as I said, I loved the kids' reaction to him not coming through with the ketchup. The ending where Peter gets fired for his silly 200 taps on the truck, only to be saved by Cleveland, was predictable. We had a similar message about Peter's incompetence and mediocre presence being needed in an episode last season. At least it was shown to us how much Cleveland's old job meant to him, so it's understandable he wanted to get it back. A final thing to add about this: although the change happened last season, this was the first episode to really focus on Cleveland since he's had his new voice actor, Arif Zahir. The voice to me sounds close enough to the original for it not to bother me. It's certainly a lot better than the voice changes some other shows have done anyway. Episode 6. Happy Holo-ween. While attending a Halloween carnival, Peter meets its owner, who shows off his holo maker. So Peter decides to make a hologram of himself to get out of household chores. My best cutaway here was the Dracula giraffe cutaway getting messed up because Peter's setup was muffled. The best thing about this episode for me was the Halloween park itself. I gave this one a 3 out of 5. First off, I have to give credit to the art design for the Halloween park at the start. It was very vibrant, with lots of good background visuals. However, the main plot was very unoriginal. A clone created to ease someone's workload had been done countless times across media, and the clone going rogue trying to steal the real person's life is the most common place for that plotline to go. Even the ending fight, where Peter is losing convincingly, only for the family to chip in to help just in time, was cliché. Still, this was an okay watch in spite of it being very obvious and predictable. Lois not taking Meg when she realised that Peter is fake is a very typical Meg joke, but jokes I did like were the Life of Larry reference from one of Seth MacFarlane's earliest shows, for people who don't know, which later led into Family Guy. At the Halloween park, I liked the House of Unskippable podcast ads, and Clone Peter appearing in a burst of thunder as the family are about to escape in the car brought some drama. Episode 7. The Stewaway. During a game of hide and seek, Stewie takes refuge in Quagmire's suitcase, only to wind up in Paris. Meanwhile, Lois is intent on breaking Bonnie's Instagram like record. My best cutaway here was Chris watches a streamer on Twitch, talking quietly, then loudly. My best moment was Quagmire bonding with Stewie. This one gets a 4 out of 5. Act 1 was a fairly cute game of hide and seek between Stewie and Brian. It's mainly cute because of how seriously Stewie takes it, describing it as peekaboo on Flintstone's vitamins. He takes the game so seriously, he ends up hiding in Quagmire's suitcase, and doesn't even intend to get out, ending up making the trip all the way on Quagmire's work flight to Paris. Eventually, once in Paris, Quagmire finds him of course, but they get on surprisingly well. We don't get the Quagmire-Stewie pairing ever on the show really, but I did enjoy their camaraderie here. It gets a bit too out of hand though, as Quagmire takes him out on a town, drinking wine, and Stewie ends up getting lost, wandering around Paris. Quagmire, feeling desperate to find him, calls Brian for help, even flying him to Paris to help with the search. Eventually they find him scared in a cemetery, but Brian comforts him, saying this was all one great game of hide and seek. That was a nice callback to earlier, and the three of them hug it out, in a relatively wholesome ending. The subplot with Lois dragging Peter to Vermont, in her vain quest to get more Instagram likes, was okay. It does provide some decent satire about how obsessed with this superficial social media attention people are in real life, even when it's to the detriment of their actual life, like it is for Lois here. She cares more about getting more likes than Bonnie, than she does about her own son being missing. Still, overall this episode had a nice, fresh vibe, so a pretty high 4, honestly, is very much warranted. Episode 8. Get Stewie. Stewie finds himself a public target after a pop star unleashes her fanbase on him for an online comment. Meanwhile, Peter gets lap band surgery. There were no cutaways here, but my best moment was Stewie singing Mr. Boombastic. This one gets a 3 out of 5. Stewie gets fanatical about this teenage star because he used to be a fan of hers on Jolly Farm, so he tricks Brian to come along with him to one of her concerts. While there, he makes a social media comment with innocent enough intentions, which the girl takes exception to. So she shows an image of Stewie up on screen to all the people at the concert, calling him a bully. Of course her fans eat it up and now hate him. They hit the fairly standard notes here, calling out the culture of celebrity worship, which I definitely agree is a problem. It's fine for celebs to have their own opinions, but doesn't mean you need to follow without thinking for yourself. And when it gets down to the extreme shown here, with doxing and harassing in public, it's no good for anyone. At least Brian comes through in the end, repairing Rupert for Stewie. Not much worth mentioning about Peter's gastric band surgery, but I will say his stretchy skin being used as a kite was a ridiculous visual. Another mention though to Stewie singing Shaggy's Mr. Bombastic. By far the best thing here. He made a great job of it. Episode 9. Carny Knowledge. Brian starts dating a carny, but they discover they have no shared interests. There was only one cutaway here, which was Lois recounting her first day working at a rice pilaf factory. My best moment was the father-son game at the start. This one gets a 2 out of 5. This falls flat simply because Brian's carny girlfriend did nothing for me. Your entire enjoyment of this episode is predicated on you buying into them as a couple, but they had no real chemistry or any common beliefs. So unsurprisingly, everything ended abruptly. The only reason they're together is really a case of Brian being desperate. He really will fuck anything, won't he? Standards on the absolute floor. The best jokes they could come up with in this episode were trashy, carny and incest ones. I didn't find it enjoyable to watch at all. The subplot wasn't much better. Just some pointless back and forth, bickering between Peter, Chris and Lois. No character moments came out of it. The only decent gag was Peter tying the piano up above the door, not to drop it on Lois, but to keep it out of her access, because she likes it so much. I know she's a piano teacher, but we haven't really seen her do it much on the show lately. I suppose we'll just have to take their word for it. Episode 10. The Candidate. Stewie and Doug compete for the honour of class snack captain. My best moment and cutaway was Stewie playing Simon Says with Paul Simon and Simon Cowell. Of course Stewie likes One Direction and wants to thank Simon Cowell so much for them. To be honest, that moment was decent. It wasn't amazing, but I struggled to pick a clear best one here. But there were lots of okay ones, which maybe gives you an insight into the rating of a 3 out of 5. If nothing else, this did have more cutaways and quicker pacing than most of the recent episodes, but was still a mixed bag for me. I like the setup how Mayor Wild West inspires Stewie to become mayor, only as his first stepping stone to politics is to become embroiled in this daycare election. The Stewie-Doug conflict was more of the same, until he accused Stewie of being an accident, and Chris got involved with Doug's campaign. Still, the election plot was kind of in and out, so it never felt that important. Chris proving Stewie was in fact only half an accident was kind of creepy, honestly, but I do at least buy that Chris has all these tapes of his parents having sex. The dude is a weirdo like that. The ending was like, oh, I won the election, because most of the other kids are mistakes. Also, Doug died off screen in a commuter plane crash. That was really out of the blue. I wonder why they decided to kill him off screen like that, but I was never a massive fan of Doug as a character, so I won't miss him much at least. Episode 11. Love Story Guy. The guys recount their first true love stories, which each bear great resemblance to popular movies. There was only one kind of cutaway here, which was Peter recalling Chris breaking up with his first true love. My best moment was Quagmire's constant annoyance with the other stories. I gave this one a 2 out of 5. I mentioned it with the season premiere. This show is starting to massively overuse these anthology episodes. Another one so quick is really pushing it. So to mirror them, I'm going to be just as lazy and half-ass this episode review. The castaway part was probably the best, just because there was some drama with the storm, and at the end Quagmire got over it all by discovering porn. The Dirty Dancing segment was rather dull. Joe could not carry the segment by himself, and even bringing in Dr. Hartman couldn't save it. The final part seemed to have potential, with Peter being dragged through the screen into the movies and following Meg Ryan through them all. However, even this turned out to be all a dream. Honestly, the ending back in the real world between Cleveland and Donna was kind of nice. Probably the best bit here. Well, outside of Quagmire dissing the episode throughout, I appreciate him speaking for people like me who are tired of this type of format. Episode 12, Old West. The guys try to help Mayor Wild West reconnect with his estranged father, Old West. Once again this season there were 0 cutaways. But my best moment was Cleveland saying a bunch of grabby guys thought his son was Lizzo. Maybe the bras don't help with that. I gave this one a 3 out of 5. I don't massively like episodes fully centered around Mayor West. They tend to be not as funny just because of his personality, and everything he says is obviously filtered through his monotonous tone of voice. But here, meeting his lively dad had enough juice to make this worthwhile. They sustained it by carrying over the Father's Day theme, set up with the guys in Act 1, to an apparently decades-long feud between the Wests. Finally, after hanging out with Old West for a while, in the backyard, and using a Trojan Bosch to distract Joe in order to break him out of prison after he got arrested, they finally all meet back up at the ranch, where Old West confesses to his son that he was just trying to make sure that he never grew up like him, as a bit of an outlaw, forced to do crime. So Wild forgives his father with a shot in the leg, but tells him that he never wants to see him again. Truly the happiest of all endings, in the tough cowboy world at least. As well as Cleveland's fatty son, another joke I really liked was the door slamming on Peter's ass. Almost a Tom and Jerry style of slapstick there. Episode 13, Single White Dad. When Peter is mistaken for a single parent, a lady named Becky falls for him. My best cutaway here was Peter's orchard being taken away, and best moment was Peter changing Stewie's diaper with all these single mothers looking on in admiration. I gave this one a 3 out of 5. First things first, I did like the goofy Donkey Kong intro, where Chris poo-poos the game, so they set up a real life version on the house. Of course, Stewie loved being dressed up as the damsel. It also kicked off the story with Lois getting a broken foot, forcing Peter to step up and take care of Stewie. He kind of does it, but as we all know, with Peter, he can't go too long without trying to take advantage of the situation. He keeps lying for free stuff and sympathy by claiming that his baby's mom is dead and that he is a single father. This garners him a lot of sympathy from women, because apparently a dad actually being a dad makes him some kind of superhero. There is some truth to this, I think, but again, depends entirely on the woman involved. Some might like it, whereas it might be a turn-off to others, believe it or not. Either way, one woman is certainly not turned off. She really takes to Peter, and uses playdates with Stewie and her son as an excuse to get into a relationship with him. Peter does not put a stop to this. He instead keeps the lie going, which results in a very exaggerated sitcom-y type ending, where a woman comes over to his house. Peter has to struggle to keep everyone from finding out what's been going on, which he ends up failing spectacularly at. There was some entertainment with all this, but the way Lois forgives him after she finds out was, as they hinted at, kind of undeserved. Still, what do we expect from those two at this point? The other main good moment here was Lois putting Brian in his place. after he offered to look after her only to try and wiggle his way into her affections. Episode 14, White Meg Can't Jump. Meg joins the high school basketball team, but is only able to perform well when Peter insults her. There were 0 cutaways here, but my favourite moment was the ending. This one gets a 4 out of 5. The main plot here was fairly simple, but it was about as earnest as you will ever get with one involving Meg. She tries out for the girls' basketball team and plays well whenever she's heckled by Peter. It's good to see Meg so determined to prove him wrong, and with Quagmire's help they actually team up, using this strategy to make her a dominant player. It's a real nice change to see Peter's insults actually helping Meg for once. There is a bit of forced conflict with Peter losing his voice, but they don't dwell on that. He soon regains his insulting ability, and Meg wins the season championship for her team. Again, by Meg's standards, a very feel-good ending. The subplot of Stewie going down the YouTube lies rabbit hole was okay. Him being traumatized by walking in on Peter and Lois was a bit freaky, with his multiple personalities he develops. But the one scene I did like was his imagination, after Lois told him the floor was lava. Some sneaky good animation there. I also found this episode on the funnier side, with Principal Shepard's ex stealing his narration as part of the divorce settlement. Quagmire's line about how he can enter because the gym is not connected to the main campus. Unny butt scratcher. Verbal communication only. 2 for $1, but only if you holler. Poor Peter missing out on his favourite item. Episode 15, Adoptation. To restore his public image, Carter adopts a young girl from an orphanage. My best cutaway was the advertisement for the Brooks Brothers. My best moment was the wolf tricking Brian into going in its enclosure by saying he read his book. He hadn't. He just tore Brian to pieces instead. I gave this one a 4 out of 5. I liked the opener here before the intro. Not only did it set up how much everyone hates Lois recounting her crazy dream, it was also a nice reference to Bob's Burgers and The Simpsons. Now in terms of the main bulk, I am a Carter fan, so it was nice seeing him get some much needed screen time. Sure, it was sudden for him to grow such an attachment to this orphan girl, Tatum, but how awkward he was about the whole process did make it a little more believable. Lois getting jealous that he treats Tatum better than he did herself was not original. We have seen her express similar thoughts before, and Tatum getting trapped in a gorilla pit at the zoo was wacky as hell, even being a bit of a Harambe reference. The ending was great though. Lois retelling her dream from earlier, getting the gorillas to back off, was just the right kind of stupid. Of course, kind of dumb, but still theoretically possible at least. Apparently Tatum somewhat sticks around on the show, so that's another thing to come from this episode. There were also nice jokes here, like Carter saying he would buy the orphan rather than adopt her, Stewie lecturing Brian, but saying the word belly, so he has to stop and give him a belly rub. And to add to the wolf one I mentioned, they also do a follow-up with the gorillas. They also beat Brian up, but this time it was because they actually did read his book, they just didn't like it. Episode 16, The Bird Reich. To take advantage of a work policy granting leave after a pet's death, Peter adopts an 80-year-old parrot. He finds out he used to belong to Hitler. Meanwhile, Brian writes a new book. There was only one cutaway here, which was Meg's class reenacting The Sound of Music. My best moment overall was Lois had 3 lattes on a bottle of wine. Her breast milk was basically a speedball. That quote from Stewie. I gave this one a 2 out of 5. Peter getting this old parrot just to wait for him to die and get 6 weeks off from work was about as exciting as it sounds. The revelation that he was Adolf Hitler's old parrot brought surprisingly little drama. He messes around for a bit before some people chase him in a rushed scene, and he takes it to a rabbi, where he learns that the parrot was in fact Jewish. Gonzo was just pretending to be a Nazi to escape the war. Gonzo soon was Gonzo though, as he died right after that revelation, only for Peter to flush him down the toilet. Wonderful. The subplot was not particularly good either, just more of pretentious Brian trying to be a writer and failing miserably. Stewie getting rid of his book, and Brian getting upset about it, all felt so petty, especially with the ending, where Stewie makes him feel better in the most pathetic way possible. There were also a few uneasy feeling type of moments, to me at least, like Peter trying to kill Brian by cutting his brakes, or Joe being quite happy to let Bonnie cuck him with random men. Brian saying, "Put the vape down on Nelson Mandela's grave, knowing we were both finally free," is also just such a typical douchey thing for him to say. Episode 17, a bottle episode. Lois is blocked from Airbnb after being accused of stealing. Meanwhile, Brian and Stewie buy saltwater taffy in bulk, but struggle selling it. Once again, there was a lonely cutaway here. How cryptocurrency Carl wants his mansion painted metal black. My best moment was Lois's unhinged rant at Dottie. This one gets a 3 out of 5. This had a similar tone to the Customer of the Week episode, just a less intense version. Lois was the one in the wrong, of course, cheekily stealing the not-so-little bottle of shampoo. She may see the bad review as petty and getting permanently banned as a harsh punishment, but at the end of the day she can only blame herself. As usual, she never wants to take any personal responsibility for what she did, and Dottie was right, she only cared when she got caught. The sheer pettiness of Lois, to pose as a delivery driver, just to threaten Dottie with a bad review, was next level, as was the way she delivered the package and her rant. In the rain and lightning storm, it worked though, so going by results, it was the right thing to do. Screw morality. Airbnb getting a bit of a bashing I also enjoyed. I don't get the appeal of that at all. Definitely not my cup of tea. The subplot of Brian and Stewie failing to sell taffy was not great though. A lot of wasted time, with not too many good jokes. I guess Bruce ringing up Brian in the middle of the night for jokes was okay, and the ending grift where they sell it to MAGA guys was somewhat accurate though. Not just about Trump supporters, but many people are susceptible to obvious scams if their favourite celebrity is the one endorsing it. Episode 18, That Man and Robin. When Peter gets a job as the new night watchman, he tries to turn Pawtucket Brewery into an after-hours bar. The single cutaway was Brian buying a horny German toilet plunger. My best moment was Moses Burford trying and failing to dramatically emerge from the darkness. I gave this one a 3 out of 5. Well, everyone in the main plot was unlikable. Brian for being willing to pretend to be someone's lost dog, to scam them for money, only to abandon them, and obviously the TikTok guy for putting animals in danger for his ridiculous money-making stunts. Stewie and Chris try and I guess luckily succeed in saving him from being tied to a drone, but it was a silly and unimpactful ending from a character perspective. The only thing it had going for it was some mild satire about people doing dangerous immoral things for internet fame and clicks. The other plot was good though. Peter's shenanigans with the old night watchman were entertaining, and thankfully they kind of ended on good terms, because the old codger was a nice enough character. Also, final point, this ending with the carbon monoxide poisoning was bizarre. Episode 19, From Russia with Love. Brian gets his Instagram hacked by a Russian hacker. Meanwhile, Lois reverts to her traumatized teenage self when Quagmire starts dating her high school bully. There were no cutaways here, but my best moment was Meg speaking Russian. It's always good when Mila Kunis gets to flex her skills with that language. This one gets a 2 out of 5. I didn't feel this one at all. Most of the jokes and plot points either felt unfinished or were just uncomfortable. Lois getting bullied by this mean girl in school could have been interesting if they went somewhere with her as a character. However, it was revealed that Lois was making it all up, in a way which frankly made little sense. The whole telling her about her shoes being untied and trying to catch the ball, and that's what resulted in her pushing Lois into the pool. It's all very dubious. I guess Lois is simply an unreliable narrator. Brian and his Instagram account, with a mighty 5 followers, getting hacked was kind of low stakes on the face of it. Putting his credit card information aside, how much money does Brian even have on his credit card anyway? Probably not much. It turned into a big deal though, when they travelled to Russia to track down the guy who did it. Only he takes a liking to Meg, because she is considered pretty over there. So she decides to stay in Russia with him, and that's the episode. Surprisingly, this will be continued for the season finale, so let's hope it's done better there. One final thing I have to point out is how they kept saying Lois is only with Peter because he threatens to kill himself if she leaves. They even say that's how they got together in the first place. I hated that joke. It's not only in bad taste, it even contradicts the continuity of the show. That's not how they got together in the first place at all. Episode 20, Adult Education. After Meg stays in Russia, she and Ivan get married, but she soon finds out the truth. Meanwhile, Chris ends up joining Principal Shepard in shooting pornos at the school. My favourite cutaway here was Chris compares the discovery of his calling to that of Steve Martin. Gotta love that banjo. My best moment was Chris taking over the role as the porn director. This season finale gets a 3 out of 5. The continuation of Meg's time in Russia was mostly as drab as the Russian surroundings. Her song was okay, I guess, as well as jabs at Putin and the Russian government, and the US for its healthcare system, which is apparently inferior to the Russian one. Still, Meg and Ivan getting married had no real impact. The ending where it's revealed the guy was just scamming Meg to try and get into America was very rushed, and it just confirmed that the time the two spent together was a waste of everyone's time. At least Meg using the tyrannical government against him by mocking the state from his phone was kind of clever. The subplot was weird, but made a surprising amount of sense. Is it really a surprise to anyone that Principal Shepard would shoot porn at the school? The guy is a weirdo. Chris being talented at directing it also checks out, given how much of it he's watched. I especially liked his line, "Get that cigarette out of the shot, kids are gonna watch this." It's true that kids are always going to find a way to watch, no matter what dumb policies governments try to put in place. Online Safety Act. Overall, this episode was better than its predecessor, without fully making the two-parter worthwhile. That's all the episodes done, so welcome to the Season 21 summary. The overall average score was 3.05, similar to last season, but 1 point better in fact. And the pie chart looks very similar as well. 2s, 3s and 4s, with over half the season being 3s. Just a solid season which I'll expand on more in a minute. My bottom 4 episodes, because there were only 4 2-rated episodes, I didn't want to single a poor 3-rated episode out. So they were the Bird Reich at 4, From Russia with Love at 3, Love Story Guy at 2, and Carny Knowledge as the worst. Now the number 5 episode rated here is actually incorrect. Happy Holo-ween is my favourite of the 3-rated episodes, but there were 5 4-rated episodes, so White Meg Can't Jump should actually be number 5. But hey, I couldn't be bothered to go back and change the slide. The top 4 are correct though, and they go as follows. Adoptation at 4, the Stewaway at 3, Bend or Blockbuster at 2, and the Munchurian Candidate as the best, and the only one which was really close to a 5. Right, this season, how should I describe it? At one point it was going on to be even better, something I would genuinely call a good season, but it did stumble a bit towards the end, so it ended up being just average, maybe slightly above, which I'll keep saying I will take for Modern Family Guy. The most obvious thing to note about this season is there were hardly any cutaways, and it was noticeable, and maybe it hurt the comedy a little, but I do think it was largely cancelled out. There were quite a few good character related jokes this season, more than there have been for a while, so they did manage to kind of make up for the lack of cutaways, just about. In general, that's what this season did best. It tried to make funny uses of the characters, and put them in some weird out there positions, like Meg going to Russia or Chris directing porn, Stewie getting lost in Paris with Quagmire, the whole awkward family dynamic in the Munchurian Candidate. The characters definitely had some moments to shine in this season, even if the episodes weren't necessarily the most experimental. Anyway, that's all I have to say about this one. I'll be back next time after my usual detour for some South Park action. But for now, thank you all for watching and take care.